Yeah, you know it's getting real now. You know it's getting real now. You know we weren't making things up. We wasn't just tripping. Oh, Stephanie White got on camera and said it. She admitted they blew it. There's no size on the team. There's not enough size. Stephanie White finally admitted her, Amber Cox, Kelly Crosskoff in the front office blew it again for a second straight offseason. They blew it in an offseason in which 80% of the players were free agents.
What happens when a coach quietly admits the roster is too thin, the rotations aren't working, and the numbers behind the scenes just don't make sense? While expectations around Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever are higher than ever. The moment Stephanie White spoke up, it stopped sounding like normal strategy and started feeling like a warning no one was ready to hear. Is this really a championship push, or just a rebuilding phase being sold as contention? And how long before these cracks turn into headlines the entire league can't ignore?
Her coach, and I want to.
Okay, I don't see it as building a team around Kelsey Mitchell, but I just don't like her words because it does sound like, oh, we gotta give her the chance to lead the team and stuff like that, and like it's a rite of passage, like it's a born right or something for her. Lady, the reason why you came to the Fever wasn't because of Kelsey Mitchell, ding dong. The main reason why you came to the Fever is because of Caitlin Clark. Let's keep it a buck. That's the same thing with Kelly Crosskoff and all these goons like Amber Heard and all them jokers all came for Caitlin Clark.
Turns out the most revealing moment of the entire offseason didn't happen during a trade, a signing, or even a game. It happened in a routine media appearance, where Stephanie White spoke with a level of honesty that quietly unraveled the carefully packaged narrative surrounding the Indiana Fever. What was supposed to be a standard update quickly turned into an unintentional expose, one that exposed far more about the team's reality than anyone expected.
The two worst words associated with the National Basketball Association right now is load management. That's the two words that has greatly assisted the NBA in falling from grace as the clear-cut, at one time, the clear-cut number 2 sport after the NFL in the country.
For weeks, the prevailing belief was that the Indiana Fever were carefully building a true contender around Caitlin Clark, whose presence alone should have made every roster decision easier. A player of her caliber naturally demands a team constructed to maximize her strengths, surrounding her with length, reliable shooting, and positional versatility that can fully take advantage of the defensive pressure she forces every single night.
This is nasty work for Caitlin Clark, man. This front office is piss poor. We all address the Indiana Fever. And like I said, I'm not here to, get on Raven Johnson. I just think there were better options out there. Now, we got on this team during free agency, said, hey, where are the bigs? Where's the size? Okay, you didn't get enough bigs. I wasn't comfortable with just Maisha Hines-Allen and Dantas as the only bigs off the bench. I mean, we don't know what Michaela Timpson is. You had an opportunity.
Instead, the composition of the Indiana Fever has started raising tougher questions, especially around the heavy reliance on smaller guards instead of the kind of frontcourt size usually needed to battle the league's most physical lineups. As those concerns shifted from speculation to reality, the conversation stopped being about what the Fever could become and started focusing on what they clearly lack. That became impossible to ignore when Stephanie White openly acknowledged the team's physical limitations. Her admission that certain opponents create problems because of size was not just a casual observation. It was a direct reflection of a structural mismatch built into the roster itself. When a head coach publicly points out a fundamental disadvantage before the season even begins, it signals a level of internal concern that usually stays behind closed doors. Teams like the New York Liberty, with stars like Breanna Stewart and Jonquel Jones anchoring a physically dominant lineup, offer the clearest blueprint for how elite teams control both ends of the floor. Against that standard, Indiana's current rotation looks less like a strategic counter and more like a collection of overlapping skill sets that may struggle to survive under sustained pressure.
Liberty, we got Stephanie White. It's also day 5 for the training camp. We about to hear her thoughts. Hey, don't look at me. Don't look at me. We got to watch her. We know she will flip-flop real quick in these interviews. You see what I'm saying? Let's not forget the Warner Bonner. That was all Stephanie White. She's the one who brought her over here from Connecticut.
However, the concerns go beyond physical matchups and reach into the financial structure of the Indiana Fever, creating an entirely different layer of pressure. During that same media availability, Stephanie White described parts of the team's salary commitments as difficult to fully understand, a statement with major implications. When a head coach shows uncertainty about the financial decisions shaping the roster, it suggests a disconnect between the front office's long-term vision and the on-court reality the coaching staff has to manage. Looking at the contracts themselves, the issue becomes clearer, with meaningful money already committed to role players like Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull. The problem is not necessarily any single deal, but how those commitments stack together inside the larger salary structure, especially with Caitlin Clark moving closer to the kind of major extension that will define the franchise's future. As Clark approaches that next contract phase, financial flexibility becomes everything. Spending heavily too early in the roster-building process can limit the team's ability to fix obvious weaknesses later, especially when trying to add the exact complementary pieces needed to maximize her impact.
Pressure.
If Caitlin Clark was not there, would she flock to the Indiana Fever after the Connecticut Sun run? No, she wouldn't. So stop this nonsense about priority this, priority that. Okay? Just get the deal done. All right? Just get the deal done. I don't think it's just the words that she's using. It just sounds goofy. It sounds like she talks to both sides of her mouth, and that's why I'm not a fan of Stephanie White. She straight up lies a lot. I don't trust what she says, and she's kind of shady, bro. She got the worst poker face ever because I just don't believe her. Okay?
This creates a situation where the Indiana Fever front office must balance immediate competitiveness with long-term sustainability, a challenge that becomes far more difficult when early decisions start limiting future flexibility. At the same time, the messaging around the team's goals has added another layer of intrigue. Comments focused on experience, growth, and team chemistry may sound positive on the surface, but they carry a very different meaning when attached to a player like Caitlin Clark. In a league where success is ultimately measured by championships, any shift away from that standard naturally invites scrutiny. It creates a complicated narrative that will only be settled by what happens on the court. The foundational talent in Indiana is still undeniable, and the core is strong enough to compete at a high level under the right conditions. But how far that core can go depends entirely on whether the surrounding pieces actually fit both the strategic vision and the physical demands of the league. As the season gets closer, the margin for error keeps shrinking, and the questions raised all off-season are about to demand real answers.
We know they'll lie. We know. They know we want to play fast. She wants to do a motion offense. Like she does whatever she wants to do, and then Clark be listening. So we got to watch her to make sure she's on the same page. She said she want to play with pace. All right, I'm not expecting too much from the preseason games, obviously, but I'm watching. Because it sounds to me like Raven Johnson's about to get a lot of minutes, the way she keeps talking about this defense, right? And my thing about it is this. Like, how is that supposed to work out? Because Clark should be averaging a double-double this season. Like, we're talking about somebody who has the most assists in the season, all right, in the entire existence of this league. The ball needs to be in her hands.
Every matchup, rotation decision, and in-game adjustment will become a live test of whether the current roster construction can actually withstand the problems it was designed to solve for the Indiana Fever. In that sense, the real evaluation hasn't happened yet, but all the conditions for it are already in place. What makes this situation compelling is not a single weakness, but the convergence of multiple uncertainties at a pivotal moment in the team's development. The Fever aren't simply in a rebuilding phase or steady growth cycle. They're trying to accelerate into contention while still resolving structural questions that could shape their trajectory for years. Whether that approach proves visionary or misguided will ultimately depend on execution, because basketball has a way of exposing every imbalance with ruthless clarity once the ball is actually in play. Theoretical discussions about spacing, size, and roster balance will soon give way to real possessions, real matchups, and real consequences. That transition is what turns this from off-season analysis into something far more urgent. And at the center of it all is the rotation itself, now carrying the combined weight of expectation, scrutiny, and uncertainty around the Caitlin Clark era taking shape in Indiana.
Ooh, Indiana Fever coach Stephanie White sat down with the Good Follow podcast and kept it a hundo about the toxic narratives that surround the Indiana Fever and Caitlin Clark. She said, that will not be happening on her watch. WNBA fans, women's basketball fans, the real Indiana Fever fans, if you're like me, and you're excited about this WNBA season, but you're a little afraid of the racism, homophobia, and anti-blackness rearing its ugly head again, I have some good news for you. Indiana Fever coach Stephanie White said something that I think we all just wanted to hear come out of her mouth. She stated that there will be no place for the hate, vitriol, the language, and the narratives that were spinning around all last season.
When a roster leans heavily toward a specific archetype, here, smaller, perimeter-oriented guards, it puts the coaching staff of the Indiana Fever in a position where every lineup decision becomes a trade-off. The challenge is no longer just about maximizing offense or tightening defense, but about finding combinations that can do both without exposing clear weaknesses. That balancing act becomes even harder against teams built around size, length, and versatility, where each substitution can shift one problem into another area of the floor. For Stephanie White, this isn't an abstract coaching theory, it's a nightly problem to solve in real time, shaped by roster construction decisions made well before she stepped into the role. In that environment, creativity can help, but it cannot fully erase structural gaps. Matchups still matter, and over a full season, they tend to reveal patterns that short-term adjustments can only partially hide. This is where the discussion naturally returns to Caitlin Clark, whose presence simultaneously raises the team's ceiling and sharpens the focus on its weaknesses. Her ability to stretch defenses, create offense, and control tempo gives the Fever a foundation that very few teams can match. But it also demands specific kinds of support, players who can finish possessions, defend multiple positions, and maintain spacing without sacrificing physical competitiveness. When that supporting structure is not fully aligned, the responsibility on the primary creator increases significantly. Even elite, generational-level talent can only offset so much imbalance before the margins start to show.
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, everybody wants to win championships. Like that's the competitive spirit is part of why we do what we do. And you got to put it out there. Like, right? You got to put it out there. You got to talk about it. But at the same time, I think for us, understanding that doesn't happen now. Right. It started in the off season. Once we get our team together, it starts with every day we prepare, putting ourselves in position to win. And look, again, I've been around long enough to know that everything kind of has to align, right? Everything has to align. But the things that we can control, we've got to control every day.
In a league as detail-driven as the WNBA, once a pattern shows up, it doesn't stay unnoticed for long. Opponents of the Indiana Fever don't just identify weaknesses, they actively game plan around them. If a team consistently struggles with size, physicality, or certain defensive matchups, that becomes a recurring point of attack rather than a one-off issue. The result is a constant pressure to adjust, forcing a more reactive approach instead of allowing the team to dictate tempo and structure. For Stephanie White, that reality turns every game into a tactical reset. Even small lineup imbalances can be exposed over and over across a long season, especially when opponents have the personnel to exploit them. At that point, coaching becomes less about ideal rotations and more about minimizing exposure while trying to preserve offensive rhythm. The financial layer only intensifies that pressure. Salary cap construction is not just background management. It directly shapes how flexible a roster can be when problems emerge. As the Fever look beyond the current season, that planning becomes even more critical because it intersects with the long-term arc of Caitlin Clark. When a franchise cornerstone is approaching a major extension window, every prior commitment starts to matter more. If too much of the cap is already tied up in pieces that don't fully complement her strengths, adjusting later becomes harder and more restrictive. In that sense, roster building isn't just about assembling talent, it's about preserving the ability to adapt when the competitive demands inevitably change.
You'll have a lot of depth with Caitlin, Kai Harris, and now Raven at point guard. How does that help you, especially with all the injuries you had last year and just Raven's defensive versatility?
Well, we're not speaking those into existence anymore. But I think it helps because Ty is a player who's a combo who can play on and off the ball. Caitlin is a player who can play on and off the ball. Raven is a point guard that primarily has had the ball in her hands, and so I think it gives us some versatility. Thankfully, having a couple of different guards gives us the ability to allow Kelsey to rest a little bit too. So I think we'll have a pretty good rotation when it comes to our perimeter players.
This isn't to suggest the roster of the Indiana Fever lacks talent, because that would ignore the players who remain central to its identity. Kelsey Mitchell continues to deliver scoring bursts capable of swinging momentum in an instant, while Aaliyah Boston provides a steady interior presence and two-way reliability that gives Indiana a legitimate frontcourt foundation. The real challenge is how those strengths are blended into a system that can hold up against the wide range of styles across the league. Talent alone isn't the issue. Fit and cohesion are what determine whether that talent translates into sustained success. Another layer that can't be overlooked is the psychological weight of early narratives. When questions about roster construction and direction surface before the season even begins, they can shape how both players and fans interpret every possession that follows. Confidence in the system becomes just as important as execution within it, especially for a team under constant scrutiny. With a high-profile centerpiece like Caitlin Clark, that scrutiny is amplified further. Every game becomes a case study, every rotation decision gets dissected, and every result is magnified. That level of attention creates opportunity, visibility, growth, and accelerated learning, but it also raises the stakes of every misstep. For the Indiana Fever, managing both the basketball reality and the narrative around it becomes part of the same challenge, especially when expectations are already set at a championship level.